I honestly didn't plan this, but it turns out that both of my main series reviews this week, that being this and Teen Titans, both focus on episodes about cars. I mean, Transformers is technically about cars every week, but this one's even more so about cars than usual. Sierra, the girl who Jack has a crush on, who we saw in the opening 5-part premiere episode, has really been getting into racing lately. She's very impressed by racing. And it turns out the entire town is right there with her, as illegal street racing has become a major problem in the area. Jack gets into a situation with a bully from school named Vince, who's also very into racing and is sort of a romantic rival for Sierra's affections, racing against him and his muscle car on RC, and beating him, inspiring Vince to invite him to those illegal street races. RC won't help him, though, as it involves doing something that's both illegal and against the rules for the Autobots. Even racing against Vince on the street the way she did was against the rules for the Autobots, against the rules that Optimus has set for them. So Jack goes to Bumblebee for help instead. Miko even helps him convince Bumblebee, and then they all go together to convince Raph to let him borrow Bumblebee to participate in this race. Of course, any one of the Autobots will automatically defeat any human car. That's just a given. Jack will get to show off for the girl he likes at absolutely no risk to himself. Or so he thinks. Turns out Knockout shows up at the race too. He's been coming to a lot of these races. He's very proud of his vehicle form in both capability and in looks, and likes to show it off. But once the race gets started, he and Bumblebee recognize each other and end up veering off to have a bit of a car chase, where it's revealed that Knockout, like his partner Breakdown, also has onboard weapons that he can use in his vehicle mode. Bumblebee has no choice but to call back to the base for assistance. Luckily, though, only Bulkhead and RC and the other kids see the message. Optimus still hasn't found out what's going on. In the time that it takes the other Autobots, sans Optimus of course, to get there, though, Bumblebee is forced to engage in a bit of cat and mouse with Knockout, during which Vince finds them to insist that Jack complete their race, and Knockout confuses him for one of the humans allied with the Autobots, one of the humans that the Autobots protect, and kidnaps him. His hope is that he can draw the Autobots into an ambush involving him and Breakdown together. Bumblebee, Bulkhead, and RC, though, don't really care about Vince and don't see much of a point in risking themselves to go and rescue him. I mean, you gotta look at it from their perspective. Vince is a dick. They know this. They've heard enough about him to know this, and their presence on Earth is a guarded secret. It's a big deal that they keep themselves secret. Otherwise, they can't operate as openly and effectively on a large scale. We never really find out if they would have gone through with leaving Vince to, I guess, die. I guess Knockout would have eventually killed him. But it doesn't really matter either way, because Jack, in the absence of Optimus, encourages them. He takes charge and encourages them to rescue his rival, someone who he despises. They go, and Bumblebee and Bulkhead fight break out while RC races after Knockout, trying to get the kid back. Optimus, in the meantime, though, has realized that something's going on. Miko and Raph try to lie to him, but this is Optimus Prime we're talking about. He gets that something's up, and he shows up in time to stop Knockout before he can get away, and even redeem himself a little bit for being shown up by Knockout in the previous episode. In fact, once he shows up, the confrontation with Knockout is just over. And Bulkhead and Bumblebee had already managed to handle Breakdown, so fight's done. Vince has recovered. He even knows that Jack saved him, which doesn't really mean anything because he's still a dick, but at the very least, that will always be nagging him in the back of his mind from now on. Jack straight up tells Vince that he won't participate in races anymore, showing that he has learned his lesson from this entire situation, and RC rewards him for this by allowing him to take Sierra for a ride, even though the relationship between him and Sierra never actually goes anywhere in the end. This is overall a fantastic episode. I've been hinting, I haven't outright said it, but I've been hinting in my past reviews that while we have been getting good, solid characterization for the kids, I want more actual character development for them, and this is the first step towards that. Jack is by far the most responsible of the kids, but that doesn't mean he doesn't have flaws that can be explored, and this episode explores his flaws perfectly. It shows that he is still a teenager. He still has interests of a typical teenager. He likes this girl, despite the fact that they don't even know each other well enough for her to know his name at first. And yet he is willing to go to these extreme lengths to impress her over nothing more than infatuation. That's a very teenage thing, and it's handled very realistically here, especially in that once he realizes how serious the situation is, he drops all of that. It's over. As far as he's concerned, his pursuit of Sierra is done. In the short term, once an actual Decepticon shows up, and later in the long term, he is willing to give up pursuing Sierra because he has learned to respect the Autobots and their boundaries. He is reconfirmed to be, at the very least, a mostly responsible person, and we see his sense of responsibility grow right before our eyes. We also get character development for Knockout, too. Knockout, up to this point, has been a very charismatic, almost likable villain. I mentioned that in the previous episode. All of the villains in Prime up to this point, save for the Viacons, have had dimensions to them. They've been interesting characters. They aren't one note at all. But then Knockout and, to a lesser extent, Breakdown roll into the story, and they have dimensions to them likewise, but their dimensions are different than the dimensions that we see in the other villain characters. Knockout is charismatic and holds our attention in a very different way than Starscream does. But as charismatic and borderline likable as he is, you never once doubt that he is a villain. The very first time we see him in this episode is in the teaser when he engages in one of these races. A human driver scratches his paint job, so he runs that driver off a cliff. And while the driver doesn't die, it's pretty clear that Knockout was okay with him dying if it ended up happening. Knockout is still a bad person. He's still a villain. He's just a different kind of villain. And that's good. And it's good that with as much development as Starscream primarily has gotten up to this point, that Knockout is getting some as well, as he ends up being just as important to the overall story as Starscream is. There's also an interesting underlying thread that vehicle transformers are just kind of vain by default. They tend to pick vehicle forms that they really like, that they find appealing, and so they take issue when others insult those forms. At the end, after Jack has declared that he's not going to race anymore, Bumblebee still takes a moment to show off when Vince insults him. And the first race between Jack and Vince wasn't going to happen until Vince insulted RC and she took issue to it. Like, we see that the Autobots can control their impulses. They don't just rush out and showboat every time somebody insults them the way that Knockout does. But it's still interesting to find that out, and it's good character development for them as well. Overall, this episode is clearly filler. The main plot doesn't advance here at all, except that we see Megatron has gotten some of the rust buffed off of him. But it's a really solid filler episode with good character development that's enjoyable to watch. Though I will point out that unlike the very best filler, this can't be placed anywhere within this arc. There are some developments which happen between Jack and RC relatively soon, if I'm remembering correctly, which, if this